Now, how many of you are geography buffs? Raise your hand. I'm not going to quiz you. I'm just going to ask. Okay, we have one on the bus. And he's the guide. Okay, I'm in trouble. All right, we'll do a little bit of info beforehand. So here you have the nation of Israel. What's the country just to the north of Israel?
Lebanon.
Lebanon. Okay, so you got Lebanon up here. And you're cheating because you can see that was already up there.
It's too far.
What's the nation to the northeast of Israel?
Syria.
Syria. Okay, what is the nation south?
Jordan.
South and to the south of Syria and east of Israel? Hello?
Jordan.
Jordan. Okay, nice and loud for me. Okay, Jordan. Now, if you were to go even east of Jordan, what country would you get to?
Iraq.
Iraq. And if you went even further to the east, you'd get to
Saudi Arabia.
Iran.
Oh, Iran. Okay.
Iran. Now, if you were to go, let's come back to the country just to the east of Israel, across the Jordan Valley, okay, over here. If you were to go south of Jordan, where would you get? Saudi Arabia. Now, we're right here in this little strip, close to this little strip of land called Gaza, okay, which is in the southwest portion of Israel, right along the Mediterranean Sea, okay, and we were at the north end of that, right up in here. And if you went further to the south and to the west of Israel, you get to what country? Egypt. Okay. So use your sanctified imagination, if you can, the nations that surround Israel. I'll try to do my best to kind of give you a little bit of context, because the question was asked about Shia and Sunni Islam. There are other divisions within Islam. There are many other divisions. However, there are two main divisions that most people know or think of when they think of Islam. Sunni and Shia. Sunni and Shia Islam. The division between Sunni and Shia Islam started not long after Muhammad, okay? And in the deserts of Arabia. And I won't get into all the details except to say that after the death of Muhammad, there were several other leaders that came to power after Muhammad during what was known as the caliphates, okay? Now, the caliphate, once again, is a group or a region of Islamic nations that form an empire, and they're ruled by Islamic religious system, okay? And the strictest ones it's called Sharia or Sharia law. The major division between Sunni and Shia Islam is that Shia believe that the succession of caliphs or leaders over those caliphates all have to be related to Muhammad by blood. Sunni Islam, they don't believe that it's necessary for the right leader of the Islamic world at any one time over a caliph or a regional Islamic empire. They don't believe that it has to be only by blood, that the leader over the Islamic world can be determined in other respects. Okay, the one that is ensconced in power does not necessarily have to be a blood relative of Muhammad. That's the major division, and there's a lot of detail in history. But just to keep it simple, those within Sunni and Shia Islam don't like each other at all. Sunni Islam is based primarily out of Arabia, Saudi Arabia, with Mecca being its holy city. Shia Islam is the bastion, or the head of Shia Islam would be the nation of Iran. Now, they have several holy cities, but one significant one for them is actually in the country of Iraq today, and it's the city of Karbala. So Karbala, which actually is in Iraq, is very holy to Shia Islam, and Mecca is very holy to Sunni Islam. Now, to give you the division, the percentages, approximately 80 to 85% of Islam worldwide is Sunni. So 80 to 85% of Islam around the world would be Sunni Islam. That doesn't just mean in the Middle East. That can be Indonesia, Malaysia. Sunni Islam is spread all over the world. Predominantly 80 to 85%. The other 15 to 20%, give or take, would be Shia. So Shia is much smaller. However, that's still hundreds of millions of people. So you're talking about a very, very large group of people, even if you're only talking about the smaller percentage of Shia Islam. So let's go back to where they're headquartered, essentially. Sunni Islam, Saudi Arabia. Shia Islam, Iran. Those two countries are situated across a body of water from each other called the Persian Gulf. Everybody knows the Persian Gulf, heard of the Persian Gulf, center of oil and commerce in that region. What I mentioned to you earlier is that they share one of the largest supplies of natural gas in the world, in the Persian Gulf. Qatar, which is a tiny little nation next to Saudi Arabia, a peninsula that sticks out into the Persian Gulf, and Iran on the other side of the Persian Gulf. They share that natural gas reserve. Now this becomes very significant. Why? Because the biggest supplier of natural gas, you know, we're conditioned, by the way, let me back up for a second, we're conditioned to think of oil as the major dominant petroleum product in the world, and it has been, and it's still a significant resource to have in your country to export. However, the energy that is becoming more dominant, more significant, cleaner, and more in demand is natural gas worldwide. There is a huge movement away from oil to natural gas. So you look to the countries that can supply the natural gas. Russia is a major exporter of natural gas. Russia exports natural gas to Europe. So Europe's #1 supplier of natural gas is Russia. Now in 2009, Qatar wanted to export its natural gas. This is now back to the Persian Gulf. They share the natural gas supplies with Iran. Qatar said, we want to export our natural gas to Europe because there's a fortune of money to be made. They wanted to run a pipeline, and guess where that pipeline went? The pipeline went through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, right over here, up to Syria, to Turkey, and then it was going to run to Europe. Qatar stood to make a fortune, and all the nations where the pipeline was running all stood to make a fortune because they get transport fees. So as that natural gas was running through pipelines through those countries, they all stood to make a lot of money. Qatar went to Syria and said, we want to run a pipeline through your country. And Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad, under pressure from their ally Russia, said, no, we will not let you run your natural gas pipeline through our country. This was a linchpin for Qatar because you can export natural gas by ship, you liquefy it, and you put it on ships to export it. But it's far cheaper if you can export it with pipelines. Qatar currently exports its natural gas on ships, LNG, liquid natural gas, liquefied natural gas. But they could do a lot more and make a lot more money if they can export it with pipelines. But Syria said, no, we won't let you run a pipeline through our country because of pressure from Syria's ally, Russia, Putin of Russia. Now at the same time, Iran said, we would like to run a pipeline because we share that natural gas supply with Qatar in the Persian Gulf. We want to run a pipeline across through Syria from Iraq. So you have Iran sending their natural gas pipeline, they're way over here. Iran sending it up to Iraq, northern Iraq, over to Syria, through Syria, and to Lebanon, and then over eventually to Europe. So you had two competing pipelines. Syria agreed to the latter of the two, to the Iranian pipeline. Russia sanctioned it and said, okay, we'll sign off on it. So you have two competing pipelines. Well, Qatar and Saudi Arabia were none too pleased that Iran was going to beat them in the race, the natural gas pipeline race to Europe, and run their pipeline through Syria. So Saudi Arabia and Qatar said, we're going to sponsor terror proxy war in Syria. We're going to defeat the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. We're going to overthrow him, and we're going to put our own leader, a Sunni leader. Remember, Iran and Iraq have a significant Shia influence, but Saudi Arabia and Qatar wanted a Sunni leader in Syria so that they could run their pipeline through. So what happened is Saudi Arabia and Qatar started a proxy war in Syria, and you have two competing pipelines from two competing nations. One is a Sunni nation, one is a Shia nation. They both share the natural gas supplies, and so those two competing pipelines cross in what country? Where those pipelines would be running, where would they cross? What country do both pipelines need to be successful?
Israel.
Syria. Both countries, both pipelines, were dependent upon controlling Syria. And that is the reason, primarily, there are other reasons as well, Syria is the linchpin to all of the pipeline deals. And Russia was concerned, and is concerned, about losing their natural gas monopoly, supplying natural gas to Europe. They don't want anyone else to come in, to swoop in, to take over their natural gas monopoly. So Russia swooped down into Syria. If you want to know why Russia is now in Syria, it is because they're trying to protect their natural gas monopoly, supplying Russian natural gas, which they also have a huge supply of, Russian natural gas to Europe. So Russia swooped down into Syria and has protected its investment by disallowing either pipeline from Iran or from Qatar and Saudi Arabia to run through the nation of Syria. And in an ultimate sense, Europe wants desperately to get off of Russian natural gas because they're beholden to Russia, and whatever Russia says, Europe has a very difficult time going against anything Russia does. When Russia invaded in the Ukraine and the Crimea, Europe could do very little about it because Russia controlled the natural gas that was flowing into Europe. Europe and America desperately want Europe off of Russian natural gas, and Russia is protecting its investment. So a lot of what's been going on, it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of other issues. Religion also plays a significant role in all of this, and you have other proxy groups, Islamic groups that are in the mix as well. But a core component of the war in Syria is because you have two competing natural gas pipelines, both of which needed to cross through Syria, and Russia protecting its natural gas monopoly by thwarting both pipeline projects from running through. Turkey was in the mix because Turkey also stood to have the pipelines running through its country, and Turkey stood to control a lot of the flow of natural gas in the region to Europe. And Turkey has very little of its own natural gas, but they control the pipeline route, and they stood to make a lot of money as well. So that's why Turkey's involved in the mix too. And so that just gives you a little bit of overview about Sunni, Shia, the conflict. Yes?
I was just going to say, what about the huge natural gas reserve that's just been discovered off Israel in the last
Israel,
year?
yeah, Israel has several different natural gas reserves that they've discovered. And the challenge that Israel has is how are they going to distribute it? And that's the problem that Qatar has also in the Persian Gulf. They can export it on ships as LNG, liquefied natural gas, costs more, so they can't be as cost competitive with other locations that have lesser supplies of it, but maybe can get it there by pipeline. So Israel has some of the same challenge. So Israel's been trying to work deals with Turkey, but Turkey has not been cooperative because of in the last 5 to 7 years, the newfound dialogue that has been very negative coming out of Turkey as it relates to Israel. A lot of saber rattling. So behind the scenes, Turkey and Israel work economically on a lot of different things. So there has been some talk about exporting Israel's natural gas that way. But Egypt also wants to be a regional natural gas hub. because of what's going on as well. And they've discovered some of their own natural gas areas too. So the question remains as to how Israel, who has the natural gas, how are they going to export it to markets that are willing to pay the money that they think it's worth? That's a challenge. Now I'll give you another component which I just shared with our group probably before you joined us, and that is that about 10 days ago, a Christian group that is running what's called Zion Oil from Texas, they have been working feverishly over the past several years to acquire permits to drill for oil in Israel. And they just received the permits, and they just 10 days ago started drilling for oil, of all places, close to Beit Shan in the Jezreel Valley, which is, of course, the site of the final conflict of human history, Armageddon. And that throws an interesting political and economic issue into the mix as well. Should they discover oil in the Jezreel Valley, that would be a game changer potentially, and could have a lot to do with Bible prophecy in the future days. We don't know for sure, but it is an intriguing scenario that's taking place. One other very important component. Turkey wants to reestablish, and I mentioned this back at the border, Turkey wants to reestablish its Ottoman Turkish Caliphate. In order to do that, it has to move south. To expand its empire from Turkey, it has to move to the south. And that means going into Syria. And Iran also wants to reestablish its Persian Empire, and that means moving to the west. Those two nations, if they are going to expand their empire and have more influence in the Middle East, they are going to clash at some point. They're either going to come to an agreement, or they're going to clash, because both routes, Iran moving to the west to expand the old Persian Empire, Turkey moving south to expand its old Ottoman Turkish Empire, both have to clash or come to a point of either agreeing or fighting, because both need the area of northern Iraq and northern Syria.